There comes a moment in life when the room gets quieter, not because you lost people, but because you stop pretending. The phone rings less, invitations fade, familiar faces drift away, and in that silence, a question echoes louder than ever. Why does improving myself feel so lonely? What if that loneliness isn't a sign you're doing something wrong, but proof that you're finally doing something right? Growth creates distance in ways most people don't expect, not because improvement makes you arrogant or superior, but because it quietly alters your inner landscape. When you begin to grow, your standards change first. What once felt acceptable starts to feel heavy, repetitive, and misaligned. You become more aware of how you spend your time, who influences your thinking, and which environments drain more than they give. This awareness is subtle, almost invisible at the start, but it creates a shift in rhythm. You start moving differently through life, and even without intention, that difference is felt by the people around you. Conversations that once flowed easily begin to stall, not from conflict, but from mismatch. You are no longer feeding the same cycles, and that alone creates space between you and what was once familiar. As growth continues, the distance becomes emotional before it becomes physical. You may still sit in the same rooms, laugh at the same jokes, and share the same history, yet something essential has changed. You listen more than you speak. You observe patterns instead of participating in them. Where others seek distraction, you seek clarity. Where others repeat stories, you search for direction. This internal shift can feel isolating, not because others are unkind, but because growth often removes the need to be understood. You stop explaining yourself as often. You stop seeking validation for choices that feel obvious to you. And in that quiet confidence, a gap forms, one that cannot be bridged by nostalgia or shared memories alone. Growth also introduces discomfort into relationships that rely on sameness. When you evolve, you unintentionally challenge the unspoken agreements that once kept things comfortable. The agreement to stay the same, to complain instead of change, to dream without acting. Your progress becomes a mirror, and not everyone wants to see their reflection. Some respond with distance, others with subtle resistance, and some with silence. This is not rejection in its loudest form, but it is separation nonetheless. The more disciplined you become, the fewer places you feel at home. The more intentional your choices, the less energy you have for environments built on chaos, gossip, or stagnation. Over time, this distance reshapes your sense of belonging. You begin to understand that closeness is not about proximity, but alignment. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone if your values no longer match the room. Growth teaches you to tolerate that solitude without resentment. It asks you to sit with the discomfort of outgrowing people without villainizing them. Distance becomes the cost of self-respect, the space required for transformation, the quiet proof that you are no longer living on autopilot. Loneliness, when it appears during periods of growth, is rarely a sign of failure or loss, but a transition that unfolds between who you were and who you are becoming. It arrives quietly, often after familiar routines dissolve and old connections loosen their grip. The absence feels uncomfortable at first, not because something is missing, but because something new has not yet taken shape. You are no longer aligned with your past, yet you have not fully stepped into your future. This in-between space creates a sense of emotional suspension, where the noise fades and the silence grows louder, forcing you to sit with yourself without distraction or escape. During this phase, loneliness strips away the comfort of external identity. The roles you once played for others begin to feel unnecessary, even burdensome. You stop performing versions of yourself designed to be liked, needed, or approved of. Without those roles, there is a sudden emptiness that feels like isolation, but is actually freedom without direction. The mind searches for familiar anchors, for people or habits that once provided reassurance, yet returning to them feels dishonest. This internal conflict deepens the loneliness, not because you are disconnected from others, but because you are reconnecting with yourself in a way that feels unfamiliar and demanding. Loneliness in transition also sharpens perception. With fewer voices influencing your decisions, your thoughts become clearer, more deliberate, and harder to ignore. You notice patterns you once tolerated, truths you once avoided, and desires you once postponed. The silence becomes a mirror, reflecting both your strengths and your insecurities without distortion. This can feel overwhelming, as there is no one else to blame or lean on, yet this solitude is what allows growth to take root. It forces responsibility inward, where real change begins, and removes the illusion that fulfillment can be borrowed from others. As the transition continues, loneliness teaches patience. It reminds you that meaningful alignment takes time, that not every empty space needs to be filled immediately. Rushing to escape loneliness often leads back to familiar dissatisfaction, while staying with it allows your values to solidify. You begin to understand that this phase is not meant to be permanent, but purposeful. It is the pause between chapters, the quiet recalibration before forward movement, the emotional stillness that prepares you for connections built on authenticity rather than convenience. Comfort and evolution rarely coexist for long because comfort is built to preserve what already exists, while evolution demands the courage to leave it behind. Comfort thrives on predictability, repetition, and familiarity. It rewards you with immediate relief and emotional safety, asking very little in return beyond your willingness to stay the same. Evolution, on the other hand, disrupts this arrangement. It introduces uncertainty, effort, and self-confrontation. The moment you choose growth, you begin to notice how deeply comfort has shaped your decisions, not always in your favor, but in ways that kept discomfort at bay. What once felt like peace slowly reveals itself as stagnation, and the familiarity you relied on starts to feel restrictive rather than reassuring. The conflict between comfort and evolution becomes most visible in daily choices. Comfort whispers that tomorrow is a better time, that consistency is overrated, that discomfort is a warning rather than an invitation. It encourages you to repeat patterns because they are known, even when they are unfulfilling. Evolution speaks more quietly but carries more weight. It asks you to endure temporary unease for long-term clarity. It challenges you to question habits, relationships, and beliefs that no longer align with who you are becoming. This tension creates internal resistance, where the desire to grow collides with the fear of losing what feels safe, even if that safety comes at the cost of progress. Over time, comfort reveals its hidden price. The longer you remain in it, the more effort it takes to leave. Comfort numbs urgency and dulls ambition, making potential feel distant and optional. Evolution, by contrast, sharpens awareness. It exposes the gap between your current reality and your deeper capabilities. This awareness can feel uncomfortable, even painful, because it removes excuses and highlights responsibility. You begin to understand that comfort does not protect you from hardship, it merely postpones it. The discomfort of growth is deliberate and meaningful, while the discomfort of stagnation is quiet and corrosive. Choosing evolution requires a willingness to tolerate temporary instability. It means accepting moments of doubt, loneliness, and fatigue without retreating to familiar escapes. Comfort offers immediate relief, but evolution offers transformation. One keeps life manageable, the other makes it meaningful. The path of evolution is rarely smooth, but it builds resilience, self-trust, and depth. Comfort asks you to remain where you are, while evolution demands that you step forward without certainty, guided only by the understanding that becoming more requires leaving behind what once felt enough. Choosing inner alignment over external approval is a quiet but radical shift, because it asks you to trust your internal compass in a world that constantly rewards validation from others. From an early age, approval becomes a currency. Praise, acceptance, and belonging are offered in exchange for compliance, agreement, and performance. Over time, this conditions you to measure your worth through reactions rather than reflection. Inner alignment challenges this conditioning by redirecting attention inward toward values, principles, and standards that remain consistent even when no one is watching. This shift feels uncomfortable at first because it removes the familiar reassurance that comes from being liked or understood. As you move toward inner alignment, decision-making becomes more solitary. You begin to ask yourself whether a choice feels right, rather than whether it will be praised. This often creates tension because what aligns with your truth does not always align with expectations placed on you. You may find yourself disappointing people, declining opportunities that look impressive from the outside, or stepping away from roles that once defined you. The absence of applause can feel like isolation, yet beneath that discomfort is a growing sense of stability. You are no longer outsourcing your self-respect to opinions that change with circumstances. External approval is seductive because it offers immediate feedback. A nod, a compliment, or acceptance provides a quick sense of certainty. Inner alignment offers no such instant reward. Its feedback is subtle, internal, and often delayed. You feel it as peace rather than excitement, as clarity rather than validation. This makes it harder to maintain, especially in moments of doubt. Without external reinforcement, you are forced to develop discernment, to differentiate between fear and intuition, between resistance and misalignment. This internal listening requires patience and honesty, qualities that cannot be developed while constantly seeking reassurance from others. Over time, prioritizing inner alignment reshapes your relationships and sense of self. You become less reactive to criticism and less dependent on praise. This does not make you indifferent, but grounded. You can hear feedback without being controlled by it. You can stand alone without feeling abandoned. The need to explain yourself diminishes, replaced by a quiet confidence that does not require consensus. Inner alignment does not guarantee ease, but it offers coherence. The feeling that your actions, values, and identity are moving in the same direction, even when the path feels uncertain and the audience grows smaller. Silence sharpens awareness in a way that constant noise never can, because without distraction, the mind is forced to observe rather than react. In silence, there is no immediate escape from thought, no external rhythm to synchronize with, no voice telling you what to feel or believe. This absence creates an unusual clarity. Subtle emotions that were once buried under conversation, entertainment, and routine begin to surface. You start noticing patterns in your thinking, recurring fears, habitual excuses, and unspoken desires. What once felt vague becomes defined, not because answers appear instantly, but because the questions finally have space to be heard. As silence continues, awareness deepens beyond thought into behavior. You begin to recognize how often action is driven by impulse rather than intention. Without external stimulation, the urge to fill time reveals itself, and in that urge lies valuable information. You see how discomfort has been avoided, how boredom has been mistaken for emptiness, and how movement has been used to outrun reflection. Silence removes these disguises. It shows you where your attention goes when nothing demands it, and that observation alone begins to reshape your priorities. You become more selective with your energy, less reactive to external triggers, and more deliberate in your responses. Silence also sharpens awareness of others. When you speak less, you listen more. and listening reveals what words often conceal. You notice tone, hesitation, repetition, and absence. You become aware of what is said to be impressive versus what is said to be true. This heightened perception changes how you engage with people. You stop filling gaps with unnecessary explanations and allow pauses to exist without anxiety. In those pauses, authenticity either emerges or dissolves. Silence acts as a filter, clarifying which connections are rooted in presence and which depend on constant stimulation to survive. Over time, silence becomes a form of discipline rather than deprivation. It trains patience, focus, and emotional regulation. Instead of reacting immediately, you learn to observe first. Instead of speaking to be heard, you speak with intention. This restraint builds inner stability because awareness grows stronger than impulse. Silence does not isolate you from life, it refines how you experience it. It turns attention inward without disconnecting you from the world, creating a deeper understanding of self, environment, and purpose that cannot develop in a state of constant noise. Becoming rare feels isolating because rarity is created through choices that most people are unwilling to make or sustain. When you commit to higher standards, deeper discipline, and long-term growth, your lifestyle begins to diverge from the familiar patterns around you. You wake earlier, think longer, question more, and tolerate less of what drains your energy. These changes are not loud or dramatic, but they are noticeable. Over time, the gap between your pace and the pace of others widens, and what once felt like shared ground slowly turns into distance. This distance is not built on superiority, but on divergence, and divergence naturally reduces the number of people who can walk alongside you. Isolation deepens as your values become more specific. Becoming rare requires clarity, and clarity eliminates ambiguity. You stop entertaining distractions that once felt harmless. You become selective about conversations, environments, and commitments. This selectivity can be misunderstood as withdrawal or coldness, when in reality, it is precision. Most people operate on convenience and immediacy, while rarity is shaped by intention and restraint. This difference in orientation creates friction, and over time, fewer people remain aligned with the way you choose to live, not because they oppose it, but because they cannot relate to it. As you become rarer, the emotional isolation becomes more pronounced than the physical one. You may still be surrounded by people yet feel unseen, because your internal landscape no longer matches the surface-level exchanges around you. Your concerns extend beyond the immediate, your goals stretch further into the future, and your tolerance for repetition diminishes. This creates a sense of standing apart even in familiar spaces. You realize that belonging is no longer found in numbers but in depth, and depth is uncommon. The absence of peers at your level can feel heavy, especially during moments of doubt, when encouragement would be welcome but is not easily found. Over time, isolation reshapes your relationship with yourself. With fewer external reference points, you are forced to rely on internal validation. You learn to self-regulate, to encourage yourself in silence, and to continue forward without applause. This strengthens self-trust and resilience, but it also requires emotional endurance. Becoming rare is not about standing above others, but about standing alone long enough to become aligned with your highest standards. Accepting that rarity narrows your circle, quiets your world, and asks you to find comfort in solitude while moving toward a life that few are willing to pursue. Loneliness is not a sign that you are losing your way, but proof that you have stopped walking in circles. Growth changes your direction, and not everyone is meant to follow you there. The silence you feel now is shaping strength, clarity, and self-respect. What feels like isolation today is alignment in progress.